Full motivational speech, Jonathan Cahn style, there is a mystery that runs through the pages of Scripture, hidden in plain sight, often overlooked by the hustle of religion and the busyness of service. It is the mystery of divine self-stewardship. It is not selfishness, it is not pride, it is not isolation, it is alignment. It is the call of God that before you build the temple, you must sanctify the priest. You see, the world tells you that success is found in running harder, doing more, pushing beyond the breaking point, but the kingdom speaks a different word. The pattern of heaven doesn't begin with doing. It begins with being, and before you pour out, God commands that you be filled. Do you not remember the command to Moses? Before the priest could enter the Holy of Holies, he had to be washed, he had to be cleansed. He had to put on the garments of glory. He had to anoint himself with the sacred oil. Only then could he minister to others. Only then could he carry the burden of a nation. So why do you think you can run on empty? Why do you think the God who formed you in secret, who knit you together with intention, who breathed into your lungs the breath of life, would ever ask you to destroy yourself to serve him? No, my friend. That's not sacrifice, that's sabotage, that's not obedience, that's burnout dressed in religious robes. The scriptures say, love your neighbor as yourself, but what happens if you don't love yourself? What happens if you despise the vessel God created? What happens if you run on fumes, bleeding inwardly while smiling outwardly? You are the temple, and the temple must be maintained. You are the vessel. And the vessel must be whole to carry the oil. Let me reveal a secret to you. A mystery from the ancient paths. When Elijah was overwhelmed, ready to die under the broom tree, God did not rebuke him. God did not shame him. God sent an angel, not with a sermon, but with bread and water, and the angel said, eat, for the journey is too great for you. Why? Because you can't fulfill your calling on an empty soul. You can't war in the spirit with a weary heart. You can't climb the mountain of purpose with no breath in your lungs. This is not weakness. This is wisdom. This is not retreat. This is restoration. Even the Messiah, in the fullness of his mission, withdrew to solitary places. He went to the wilderness. He climbed the mountain. He sailed across the waters, not just to preach, but to rest, to be with the Father, to be renewed. If the Son of God needed rest, what makes you think you don't? And so the Spirit of the Lord would say to you now, stop running until you collapse. Stop pouring until you're dry. Stop carrying burdens you were never meant to carry alone. Come back to the stillness. Tend to the garden of your soul. Rebuild the altar of your heart. Feed your spirit. Strengthen your body. Guard your mind. For how can the lamp burn if there is no oil? How can the warrior fight if his wounds never heal? How can you love others if you are drowning in self-neglect? This is your sacred charge, to love the Lord with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And you cannot give him strength you do not possess. So today, the divine command is this: take care of yourself first, not in rebellion, not in selfishness, but in obedience, because when you are whole, you can bring healing. When you are filled, you can overflow. When you are strong in him, you can carry the mantle of your calling. You are not a machine. You are not a resource to be drained. You are a child of the Most High, a royal priesthood, a living temple. And your Father cares more about your soul than your output. Come away with him, breathe again, rest again, live again, because God wants you to take care of yourself first. You must be filled before you can pour out. This is not a suggestion. It is a divine principle, a law of the Spirit woven into the fabric of creation itself. From the beginning, God established order, light before life, foundation before fruit. The same pattern applies to your life, your ministry, your calling. You cannot give what you do not have. You cannot pour out what has not first been poured in. A vessel, no matter how beautiful or chosen, cannot nourish another if it is empty. In the days of the tabernacle, the priests were commanded to maintain the oil in the menorah continuously. The flame was never to go out, but how could the flame keep burning without the oil? The command was not only to shine, but to be filled. The oil is the Spirit, the presence of God, the nourishment of the soul. Without it, there is no light. Without it, there is only burnout, frustration, and collapse. This is the reality of many who try to serve God while neglecting the condition of their own inner being. When God called Moses to the mountain, it was not merely to receive instructions for others. It was to first be transformed himself. Before he descended with the law, he ascended into the presence. Before he carried the word to Israel, he stood in the fire alone with God. That is the pattern. That is the design. You are called to impact others, but not at the expense of your own soul. Ministry without intimacy leads to emptiness. Service without sustenance leads to striving. Even in nature, the river must be fed by a spring, or it will dry up. The branch must be connected to the vine, or it will wither. The lamp must be filled with oil, or it will flicker and die. In the same way, your spirit must be fed by the presence of God, refreshed by rest, filled with the word, and renewed by quietness. Otherwise, you become a well without water, a voice without life, a movement without momentum. The scriptures say, guard your heart, for from it flow the issues of life. And not just guard your ministry, not just guard your platform, guard your heart, because that is the source, that is where the water flows from. That is the place the enemy seeks to drain. If he can't stop your calling, he will try to exhaust you. He will try to distract you with doing so that you forget being. He will try to convince you that more activity equals more effectiveness, but the truth is that more fruit only comes from deeper roots. Jesus told Mary that she had chosen the better portion by sitting at his feet. Martha was busy, stressed, overwhelmed, not because she didn't love Jesus, but because she believed her value was in her output. She believed her worth was in her work, but Mary knew the secret. You must sit before you serve. You must receive before you release. You must be filled before you pour out. The oil in the alabaster jar was not poured out until it had been preserved, protected, and kept full. The woman knew its value. She didn't waste it on busyness. She didn't spill it in a hurry. She waited for the appointed moment, and when she poured it on the feet of Jesus, the fragrance filled the room. Why? Because what was poured out came from a place of fullness. When your spirit is full, your impact carries fragrance. When your heart is whole, your actions carry power. This is not about perfection. It's about positioning. It's not about avoiding responsibility. It's about fulfilling it God's way. And God's way is the way of the overflow. You were never meant to live in depletion. You were never meant to survive on fumes. The Spirit was poured out at Pentecost so you could be full, full of peace, full of wisdom, full of love, full of strength. If the enemy can keep you busy enough to skip your time with God, he's already won half the battle, because an empty believer is powerless. A weary soul cannot wage war. A dry heart cannot water the seeds of others. You must protect your oil. You must tend your fire. You must drink deeply of the living water before trying to lead others to the well. God does not delight in doubt servants. He desires whole sons and daughters who carry his glory because they have been with him. The secret place is not a luxury. It is a necessity. The quietness of soul is not optional. It is foundational. Loving others requires loving yourself first. This truth is encoded into the very words of Yeshua when he declared, "Love your neighbor as yourself." The command contains within it an invisible law, as yourself. That is the standard. That is the measure. Not more than yourself, not less than yourself, but as, and so, if you do not love yourself rightly, how can you love another rightly? If you reject what God has created in you, you will project that rejection onto those around you. If you minister out of emptiness, your ministry becomes a reflection of your own internal lack. The root of love is not external, it is internal. The overflow of the heart determines the health of your relationships. And what resides in your heart will be what flows through your hands. If you carry shame within, you will carry judgment without. If you walk in bitterness toward yourself, you will walk in tension toward others. But if you embrace God's grace for your own soul, that grace will extend to every person you meet. You become a conduit of what you carry. This is why the enemy works overtime to distort your self-view. He knows that if he can twist how you see yourself, he can twist how you see others. If he can inject self, hatred, insecurity, and condemnation into your inner life, then even your attempts to love will be tainted with striving. He knows the command of God is rooted in love, so he attacks the root. When David wrote, "I am fearfully and wonderfully made," he was not boasting. He was agreeing with God. He was aligning his thoughts with the Creator's thoughts. And that is the key. You cannot walk in divine love while denying divine truth about who you are. You cannot claim to honor God and dishonor the vessel he formed with his own hands. Self-love, in the biblical sense, is not arrogance. It is agreement. It is not self-exaltation. It is humble alignment with your true identity in him. Consider the second great commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. That commandment becomes a mirror. It shows us that self-love is not optional. It is foundational. It becomes the scale by which all other love is measured. If your love for yourself is laced with guilt, neglect, and unworthiness, then every act of love you extend will be inconsistent. It will be distorted by what you lack. God's love for you is perfect, and he calls you to receive it before you try to reflect it. Just as the moon has no light of its own but reflects the light of the sun, so must your love reflect what you first received from the sun. And if you block that light in your own heart, you will walk in shadows toward others. Loving yourself isn't about idolizing your image. It's about honoring your origin. You were made in the image of God. To love yourself is to honor the image of God in you. When Jesus restored Peter after his failure, he didn't send him back into ministry first. He first dealt with Peter's heart. Do you love me? He asked 3 times, healing Peter's denial with 3 affirmations. Only then did he say, feed my sheep. Why? Because love must be restored vertically before it flows horizontally. Peter couldn't care for others until his heart was realigned with grace. Many try to serve, lead, parent, teach, and counsel, while their own hearts are filled with silent wounds. But wounded love cannot lead to wholeness. It only replicates brokenness. That is why healing must begin within. That is why self-love, God-centered, grace-filled self-love, is not an indulgence but a command. It enables you to walk in the Spirit, to live in peace, and to become a wellspring of compassion. When you care for your mind, your body, your emotions, and your spirit, you are not being selfish. You are preparing yourself to love more effectively. When you embrace God's truth about you, you begin to treat others with the same kindness, patience, and gentleness. Love is not just something you give. It is something you embody. It is something you live. And it must first live in you. The priest must be sanctified before entering the temple. This is a truth rooted in the foundations of the covenant, an ancient pattern established not by men, but by God himself. In the days of the wilderness, before the high priest could minister on behalf of the people, before he could offer sacrifices, intercede, or draw near to the Holy of Holies, he had to be cleansed, he had to wash. He had to be clothed in garments specifically prepared for the priesthood. He had to be anointed with oil. He had to be made ready, not by his own terms, but by the instructions of the Most High. Why? Because no one enters into the presence of God without first being consecrated. No one stands before the altar carrying the dust of the world. It was not just about ritual. It was about preparation. It was about spiritual alignment. It was about internal purity before external ministry. And this principle did not end with the Old Covenant. It continues today, not in shadows and types, but in truth and in spirit. You are now the temple. Your heart is the altar. Your life is the offering, and yet the pattern remains. Before you minister, before you step into your calling, before you seek to carry the burdens of others, you must be sanctified. You must be made clean. You must come before the Lord in stillness, in honesty, in surrender, because if the vessel is not sanctified, the offering becomes polluted. If the heart is not right, the actions are not righteous. This is why the priests were not allowed to serve in the temple if they were unclean. It wasn't cruelty, it was mercy. It wasn't exclusion, it was preservation. God was saying, I desire wholeness before service. I desire integrity before visibility. I desire truth in the inward parts. And so the call to sanctification is not a burden. It is a blessing. It is the process by which God refines you, purifies you, strengthens you, and prepares you to walk in authority without collapsing under the weight of it. In the new covenant, this sanctification comes not through rituals, but through relationship. It is the washing of the word. It is the fire of the Spirit. It is the pruning of the Father. It is not earned by works. It is received by surrender. It is not a disqualification. It is an invitation. Before you speak to the people, you must hear from God. Before you pour into others, you must allow Him to pour into you. Before you bear the weight of responsibility, you must carry the yoke of intimacy. The anointing oil that was poured upon Aaron flowed from his head to his garments, but it was not poured until he was fully dressed in the garments of holiness. The oil did not come before the preparation. It followed it. And so it is with you. The power of God will not rest on a life that refuses to be consecrated. The favor of heaven is not a reward for talent. It is a response to yieldedness. We live in a culture that values performance over preparation, gifting over grounding, speed over sanctity. But heaven's order is different. Heaven waits until the vessel is ready. Heaven does not rush maturity. Heaven sanctifies before it sends. Even the Messiah, before stepping into public ministry, went into the wilderness. He was baptized, he was affirmed by the Father, he was filled with the Spirit, and only then did he begin to walk in power. Do not rush past your own sanctification. Do not skip the inner work for the sake of outer results. The most dangerous place to be is in a position you are not prepared to carry. The most sacred calling begins in hiddenness, in surrender, in holiness. Sanctification is not about being perfect. It is about being set apart. It is about allowing God to strip away the false, to cleanse the residue of the world, and to clothe you in righteousness, not your own. You must allow Him to deal with your heart before He uses your hands. You must allow Him to refine your motives before He releases your ministry. You must allow Him to fill the secret places before He opens public doors. For just as the priest had to be sanctified to approach the earthly temple, so must you be sanctified to carry the presence of the living God within your temple. Even Jesus withdrew to rest and be renewed. This is not a footnote in the gospel. It is a recurring pattern, a divine model for all who would walk in His footsteps. The Messiah, the Son of the living God, full of power, full of authority, full of the Spirit, did not live in unbroken motion. He did not run endlessly from one miracle to the next, one teaching to another without pause. No, He stepped away. He climbed mountains alone. He crossed to the other side of the lake. He rose early while it was still dark to pray. He withdrew. Why? Because even the one who carried the fullness of divinity in bodily form lived in dependence on the Father. His strength was not sourced in perpetual motion, but in continual connection. He lived in the rhythm of heaven, intimacy before activity, rest before release, stillness before strategy. And if Jesus needed to retreat, then how much more do you? In Mark 6, the disciples came to Jesus after a powerful time of ministry. People were coming and going, needs were everywhere, yet Jesus said, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while." That word, rest, was not a suggestion, it was a divine imperative, because constant outpouring without renewal leads to exhaustion. Even holy work can become draining when not balanced by sacred stillness. The crowds never stopped, the needs never ended, but Jesus didn't let the demand determine His pace. He was led by the Spirit, not by pressure. He knew the secret. Effectiveness flows from alignment, and alignment requires renewal. He showed us that stepping back is not stepping away from purpose. It is stepping into the presence. It is the act of returning to the source so you can walk again in power. When He fed the 5,000, the miracle followed after He had withdrawn. When He walked on water, it was after He had gone up the mountain to pray. When He faced Gethsemane, He first entered into solitude. These moments were not accidental. They were intentional. He guarded His inner life. He prioritized time with the Father over the approval of the crowd. He modeled the balance of Spirit-led engagement and Spirit-filled replenishment. And this rhythm is not just a lifestyle, it is a weapon. Rest is resistance against the tyranny of performance. Stillness is warfare against the chaos of culture. Renewal is how you remain grounded when everything around you is shaking. The enemy seeks to wear out the saints. He whispers that rest is weakness, that stopping is failure, that pausing is laziness. But the truth is, rest is warfare, rest is restoration, rest is alignment. In Exodus, the Lord commanded his people to honor the Sabbath. It wasn't just about rules. It was about rhythm. It was about trust. It was about acknowledging that life flows from God, not from human striving. When you rest, you declare that God is your source. You declare that your identity is not in what you do, but in who he is. Even Elijah, after calling down fire from heaven, after defeating the prophets of Baal, found himself weary and afraid. And what did God do? He didn't rebuke him. He fed him. He gave him sleep. He allowed him to rest, because the journey ahead was too great for him to walk in his own strength. Elijah didn't need a new revelation. He needed restoration. So it is with you. You are not infinite. You are not invincible. You are not called to carry the world without being carried by the Spirit. If Jesus, the perfect one, took time to rest, then to imitate him is to follow him even into solitude. Renewal is not optional for the called. It is essential. In the quiet places, your strength is restored. In the stillness, your soul is realigned. In the hidden moments, your heart is recentered. You are reminded that you are a vessel, not the source. You are a branch, not the vine. You are a servant, not the Savior. And in that place of humility and surrender, true power is found. Self-care is obedience, not selfishness. This truth breaks the chains of false guilt and exposes the lie that taking care of yourself is somehow contrary to the will of God. From the beginning, the Creator established rhythms of life, light and darkness, work and rest, seed time and harvest. These were not mere suggestions. They were divine appointments. God himself rested on the seventh day, not because he was tired, but because he was modeling a principle for all creation. And when you care for yourself, when you rest, when you nourish your body, guard your mind, and tend your soul, you are not stepping outside of God's will, you are walking in it. There is a subtle deception that creeps into the hearts of the zealous, the faithful, the sacrificial. It whispers that self-denial means self-neglect. It twists servanthood into martyrdom. It teaches that pouring yourself out to the point of collapse is a badge of honor, but God never called you to die from your calling. He called you to live in it. He came that you might have life and have it more abundantly, not a life of burnout, breakdown, or bitterness, but one of balance, peace, and sustainability. Obedience is not just about outward action. It is about internal alignment. If the Spirit of God dwells in you, then you have been made a temple, and the temple must be kept in order. The priests in the ancient days were charged with maintaining the temple, not just the sacrifices, but the atmosphere, the cleanliness, the readiness. They were stewards, and so are you. Your body is not your own, it is his, and to care for it is to honor him. When Elijah ran to the wilderness, weary and overwhelmed, God didn't first correct him. He sent an angel to feed him, to let him sleep, to restore his physical strength. Only after that did he begin to speak. There was no rebuke for the need. There was divine provision. Because God knows the human frame, he formed it. He understands that your spirit cannot soar when your body is breaking down. He knows that your discernment dulls when your mind is overrun with exhaustion, and so to care for yourself is to make room for his voice. Even Paul, the apostle of tireless mission, spoke of his need for refreshment. He asked for prayers, for visits, for warmth. He urged Timothy to take care of his body, to use a little wine for his stomach, to not neglect his own well-being. Why? Because the mission does not succeed by strength alone. It succeeds through wisdom. And wisdom recognizes the seasons. Wisdom listens when the body says, slow down. Wisdom does not glorify burnout. It glorifies faithfulness, and faithfulness includes stewardship of the vessel. When you eat well, when you sleep, when you rest, when you take time to breathe and be still, you are not stepping away from the presence of God. You are making room for it. When you create margin in your life, you create space for divine encounter. You create clarity, you sharpen your spirit, you regain perspective, and that, too, is obedience. The enemy would rather see you busy than whole. He would rather see you exhausted doing good than empowered doing God's will. He would rather see you running in circles than walking in purpose. But the Spirit of God leads not with a whip, but with a whisper, not through chaos, but through peace. And that peace begins with surrender, not just of your will, but of your pace. Not just of your sin, but of your schedule. To care for yourself is not to love yourself above God. It is to love yourself under God. It is to align your daily habits with heaven's rhythm. It is to tend the fire on the altar of your heart, lest it burn out from neglect. It is to live as one who is deeply loved, deeply known, and therefore worth caring for. Not because you are the source of life, but because you are the carrier of it, and a carrier must remain whole. A vessel must remain strong. A servant must remain healthy. Not just to serve others, but to honor the one who called you. You cannot pour from an empty vessel. This principle is not poetic. It is prophetic. It echoes the very heart of God concerning how we are meant to live, serve, and give. The vessel, throughout Scripture, is a picture of the human life, formed by the potter's hands, fashioned with purpose, made to contain something holy. But a vessel is only useful when it is full. A cup cannot satisfy another's thirst if it is dry. A lamp cannot shine if it has no oil. A heart cannot give what it does not possess. The widow in 2 Kings 4 was told by Elisha to gather vessels, empty vessels, and not a few. The oil only flowed where there was space to receive it. When the vessels stopped, the oil ceased. Why? Because God's provision meets availability. But what happens when you are the vessel and you are not filled? What happens when you spend yourself day after day tending to others, answering calls, ministering, parenting, leading, and never allowing the oil to be replenished in your own life? This is how burnout begins. Not with rebellion, not with sin, but with unrelenting service, with noble intentions and sincere hearts. But sincerity does not sustain you, only the Spirit does. And the Spirit fills what is empty, not what is distracted. He fills what is yielded, not what is constantly giving without pausing to receive. Even Jesus, who was full of grace and truth, withdrew. He allowed the vessel of his humanity to be refilled by communion with the Father. And he did not apologize for it. He didn't justify it. He simply did it because he understood that power flows from presence, and presence requires space. You cannot host what you do not make room for. And you cannot pour what you do not possess. Ministry is not just about doing things for God, it's about doing things with God. And to walk with him, you must walk at his pace. The vine does not strive. The branches do not toil, they abide, and in abiding they bear fruit. The branch does not strain to produce, it simply receives, it draws nourishment, and then in due season it gives what it has been given. So too must you abide. You must tend the inner life with more urgency than the outer work. You must guard your heart, not just from sin, but from depletion. You must recognize when your vessel is low. When the oil is thinning, when the flame is flickering, not to condemn yourself, but to return to the source, to come again to the fountain that never runs dry. You were never meant to be self-sustained. You were never called to be a reservoir of endless strength. You are a vessel, you are dependent, and that dependence is not weakness. It is worship. It is the daily act of coming back to the well, of admitting your need, of refusing to pretend. The world says keep going, push harder, never stop. But the Spirit says, come, come all who are weary, come and drink, come and find rest for your soul. To pause is not to fall behind. To rest is not to quit. It is to refill the vessel. It is to ensure that what you give is life, not noise, power, not pretense, oil, not ashes. The ones you're called to bless are not helped by your exhaustion. They're helped by your overflow. And overflow only comes from infilling. This is why worship matters, why prayer is vital, why solitude is sacred, not just as disciplines, but as lifelines, as ways the vessel is refilled, renewed, restored. So you can pour again, freely, deeply, without fear of running dry, because the one who fills you is faithful, but you must make room. You must stop long enough to receive. You must let him tend to the vessel before you try to serve the world.